Hi, this is Kelly Sadler, and welcome to the Washington Times debrief of the first presidential debate of 2024. I'm joined with reporters Seth McLaughlin and Susan Ferrechio, who both were at the debate last night. Welcome, guys.
Good morning.
Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning. All right, so Seth, I'm going to start with you. You were there in the spin room. You were there. You saw the debate. What are your takeaways? How do you think last night went for both candidates?
Well, I think the spin room was definitely indicative of sort of the falling out of this thing where the Trump surrogates, as soon as the debate were over, they were littered all over the convention floor, the floor of the basketball arena. Meanwhile, it was a waiting game to wait to hear from anyone to come out to promote, advocate, defend President Biden's performance. And when they did, they were mobbed. Meanwhile, the Trump surrogates, which are Matt Gaetz, Byron Donalds, Vivek Ramaswamy, basically all his potential VP picks too, North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, Senator J.D. Vance, Senator Marco Rubio, everybody is there because they just feel like it was an ultimate home run for former President Donald Trump. And again, on the flip side, just the mere absence and the need to sort of collect yourself after the debate to decide how you want to handle the mobs of press and try to spin the thing. It said the story, and just final point on that is like typically, you guys know, at the spin rooms, both sides tend to have something sort of good to cling on to say their person really hit it out of the park or whatnot. This one felt a little bit different.
Yeah, Susan, what's your takeaway?
Well, we all saw the debate, so the one question we don't have to start with today is who won. So let's get that out of the way. We know who won. I thought even more interesting was for Joe Biden, not just how we perceived him on the debate stage, but perhaps even worse for him is what is now happening. First, the immediate reaction, and now the cascade of analysis that's come out Friday morning about this. That to me is almost more devastating because he's lost all his allies in the mainstream press. And that all started last night, obviously. I mean, you heard the panic in the voices of even Joe Biden's biggest defenders on the networks we know who love to say positive things about him no matter what. And even they were saying, look, this thing looks so bad that we need to replace him. Somebody needs to have a talk with Joe. There needs to be a plan B. It was right off the bat. And that's not stopping today. And in the spin room, certainly the Trump people were taking a victory lap and celebrating and saying, yeah, we won a second, third, and fourth debate. They were all excited. President Trump today, tellingly, is going to Virginia, which used to be kind of, a forget it state for the past few election cycles for Republican presidential candidates, but it's shown to be tied in the past two polls. And now President Trump, is heading there to Virginia today. So he's off on, breaking into states that Democrats normally shouldn't be playing defense on. So that's sort of the post feeling I got even last night, which was that Democrats were shocked and having to take some time to think about really what's next for their party. And then the President Trump's team going on a victory lap and heading into places where Republicans have rarely been successful in the past few election cycles. And that's pretty much the state of the race right now. And then moving forward, of course, all the discussion is going to be about the Democratic convention in August, what's going to happen between now and then, and all the speculation surrounding that.
Well, I mean, I was floored by just watching CNN and the post-debate coverage, and all of his biggest defenders, Biden's biggest defenders, were questioning whether Biden should be the candidate or not. MSNBC this morning is not. Mika and Joe are pessimistic. It's as though they didn't see what we have seen or I have seen in the last 2 to 3 weeks. There has been an obvious decline, an obvious mental acuity, cognitive issue with Joe Biden. I didn't think he'd actually hit the debate floor last night, and he did. I don't think he should have. If people who know him the best know where he's at and know that he couldn't do it, and they set themselves up for failure. That being said, that's just the opinion side of things. What what is the state of the race? Will Joe Biden still be the nominee for the Democratic ticket? You have Politico today, bedwetting. It's the Democratic nightmare. Will he follow through with this? And how can the Democrats replace him? Nate Silver said that he needs to drop out, and Kamala Harris is a better contender. Joe Biden this morning said that he's not dropping out, that he's going to stay in it. So, where do you see this going in the next few months?
So you're right, Kelly. Only Biden can make the decision to drop out unless there's some extraordinary change in the rules. And the other, subplot here is, don't forget, the Democratic National Committee changed the rules so that they can Zoom nominate him. In other words, do it online before he even sets foot on the convention floor in Chicago. So they could do that at any time. It would probably have to be after July 13th, when Indiana selects its delegates. They don't have a full slate of delegates yet. But, okay, July 13th is 2 weeks away. So they could do it then if they wanted to push this thing so that there was no, floor fight. From my discussions with people who are really experts on the rules and bylaws and conventions, if they do nominate him in the next couple of weeks online, as they say they're going to do, even though there's absolutely no reason for it, there's no ballot requirement deadline in Ohio anymore. But if they do this, it'll make it extraordinarily difficult to change the rules again at the convention and put somebody else in place, unless, and this is what everybody's talking about, I know Seth has been talking about, we've been discussing this too, it would have to be up to President Biden himself to say, I am going to step aside, because it's his nomination to give up pretty much at this point. We've had the primary. He's been picked by a lot. These are all Joe Biden delegates. So there'd have to be a big change. And of course, some people would say, well, last night is just evidence of a really huge, factor here that has to be put in play. And that too is possible. That's why everyone's talking about it. But I think in terms of how we look ahead here, the consensus, I think, amongst people who truly understand the rules, believe that the only way for this really to happen is for Joe Biden to make that decision. And from there, you can then speculate on who might talk to him and whether he might change his mind and step aside. And I think that's sort of where the lay of the land right now. But always keep in mind, we've got this looming potential online nomination, which the DNC has enabled through a change in their rules. So that's something that we're going to be keeping an eye on.
Seth, what do you think happens in the next 2 weeks running up to the DNC convention?
Well, we're going to have, the dust settle few days to sort of figure out how Democrats want to navigate this. The intricacies and ins and outs. That's the other thing. Everyone's going to be diving into how do you change the nominee? What are the rules? What do you got to do here? Blah, blah, blah. So we'll all get a refresher on how exactly that might be done. But I do an interesting side thing here is, for the longest time, Democrats kind of openly admitted that Vice President Kamala Harris might not be the best person to lead the ticket. But you sort of wonder, coming out of a debate performance like that they might go, well, maybe she is not as bad or can outperform what we saw from President Biden.
But Seth, and I know you saw this last night. Tell everybody about what was going on with Gavin Newsom on the floor when he came out. He was there last night to talk as a surrogate for Joe Biden, but he turned into something else once the debate was over.
Well, two fun things. So before the debate, again, the spin room, for folks who don't know, is usually this big room where surrogates go down and basically try to brainwash reporters into writing whatever, they want them to write. And Gavin Newsom, before the debate, was everywhere. He's bouncing around. It's kind of typical of, high profile surrogates, but he was everywhere talking to everyone. The cameras were following him here and there. And like I said, there was a delay in him returning after the debate, and he became kind of a Biden defender. But all the questions tossed at him were, should Biden be replaced? Would you consider, leading the ticket, whatnot? And a funny thing I found was when Gavin Newsom came out, Representative Byron Donalds of Florida was standing there with David Bossie, who's a long-term kind of on the front lines type of Republican guy. And Donald said, "Put me in, coach." And it was a jab at the idea that Newsom was kind of, back out to, subliminally say, maybe I should be leading this thing.
And he attracted, like, if you look at who
Hordes.
all the reporters were chasing around, 1,000 reporters, you couldn't get near him because everyone was asking him, almost treating him as the on the spot, potential replacement for Biden, because he really is. And their big problem, Kelly, and we discuss this a lot, is that what's their backup plan? Everybody's been talking about replacing Joe Biden for months. We've been writing stories about it. Can he be replaced? What do people think? And the thing I always hear from Democrats is, well, we would have to replace him with the next in line on the ticket. And of course, that's Vice President Harris. But she doesn't have the confidence of the voting public. We've seen that in polls. She's had problems with staff turnover. She's had problems with her messaging. And she's been a weak messenger, really. And that's one of the most important things that you can do as a leader of the party. And I don't know that Democrats are confident putting her in the place of Joe Biden. But the problem is, if they leapfrog over her with Gavin Newsom, that's not going to sit well with a lot of people in the base who are going to say, wait a second, why did you push away the first Black female vice president in favor of, we all know the storyline, and it's going to be difficult for Democrats, especially with their focus on, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And now they're, pushing aside the first female Black vice president. So they are, even if Biden did want to step aside, they're really in a bind. If they had done this earlier, see, people are now saying we should have done this earlier, and they let the candidates, including Vice President Harris, duke it out in the primaries. It wouldn't be the party deciding; it would be the voters deciding. So if she couldn't survive the primaries and they pick someone else, it would have been okay. But now they're stuck with, okay, are we going to somehow get Biden to step aside and then put somebody else in? It's not going to be like the people voted for whoever this choice is. And it's really ugly for Democrats. And that is the other side of the ledger here. There's a lot of people think that, as bad as last night's performance may have been for Biden, as Seth was saying, it's June. Give this a few weeks, or maybe maybe people won't be talking about it as much in August or October because it was so far in the past. And if he doesn't do any more debates and he just kind of gets these managed appearances and the economy maybe ticks up a little, he can maybe get in there, get out the vote. Stuff is going really well, which Democrats are really good at, especially in these battleground states. They could pull out a win. So I'm not thoroughly convinced, even though today's got a doomsday feeling for Biden, that the whole narrative might be different for the reasons I just laid out.
Well, I mean, he had 7 days to prepare for this debate at Camp David, where he had 0 public appearances. There was nothing on the presidential calendar. He was just focused in on this debate. And after 7 days of rest, he comes to Atlanta, and that's the performance that he gives. Seth, you're talking about the spin room post-debate. Biden surrogates were late out of the gate. They had to prepare what they were going to say. Other than Gavin Newsom, who did Biden have in the room on his side in that spin room that could potentially step in if there was a void, or if Biden did decide, or Jill Biden decided that for reasons unknown to us, they're going to step out?
I mean, the two heavy hitters there last night were Newsom and Senator Raphael Warnock, who is, the hometown senator, who obviously made huge waves in the 2020 election with his victory, and is immensely popular. And I think actually people have looked to him as a potential, future face of the party. But again, you get into that web of how do we unwind this thing? And like Susan was talking about, I really struggle to see Democrats who for years have talked about how Black women in particular, are the backbone of the party, passing over Vice President Kamala Harris if, they are serious about moving on. I find that a difficult thing for them to do.
So kind of shifting gears a little bit and focusing on Donald Trump's performance last night. A lot of people thought he'd come in, be combative, be aggressive, look bad. We know that he's narrowed the fundraising gap, that now he outperformed Biden in the last few months in fundraising. So now it's about equal. He's wiped out that advantage that Biden has. Moving forward, Seth, where do you see the Trump campaign going? What are their messages coming out post debate, and will they be able to capitalize on last night's momentum, and how should they?
Oh, I think they're going to go for the jugular. I think you've already, like, right after the debate, they had videos circulating of, Biden's biggest um, brain farts, or whatever the hell you want to call them. And so they're going to keep driving the message that Biden is basically too old for the job. It shows. And then on the flip side, they're going to drive the policy discussion around immigration. That has been the centerpiece of Trump since he's been in the White House, since he announced his reelection campaign. And for him, it's sort of a grab bag of what's wrong with the Biden administration. He can hit him on so many different fronts, whether it's economically. He channels it now into a message about how migrants are taking jobs away from minority voters, in particular Black and Hispanic voters, who have been, again, a key part of the so-called Obama coalition that Biden will need to drive out. So I think they're just going to keep hammering home what they've been doing already, and probably try to have Trump maintain that more calm, less radioactive approach, in the hopes that he can seal the deal with voters that have been lukewarm about him, but also haven't totally bought into Biden.
Susan, I mean, what is your take on Trump's performance? Did he win over the independents, that Nikki Haley voters that he needs to solidify his coalition last night?
That's really a good question, because those are the voters, not just Nikki Haley voters, but other wavering independents and, lean Republicans who might not like Trump and still want him to go away. Since the last election, they're just like never Trump Republicans. And I know many of them, and I know Seth, we've talked to them. So possibly, I think that he didn't really indulge much, Trump, in what he could have with Biden's performance. He had some zingers here and there about how Biden was performing, but he let Biden demonstrate himself for the public what his mental acuity is at right now. And I think President Trump, if anything, just looked concerned about it, which was good. He wasn't, it didn't feel personal, like he was mocking him, until they got to the end
The
when
golf swing.
Biden was claiming what was it, a 6 handicap, and Trump nearly fell off the stage. It was like, that bothered him more than anything. That was really funny. The golf part was like, God, that needs a more coverage, I think. So, in other words, Trump didn't indulge on that, and he also avoided. We wrote a story the day before the election that was really popular on our site, and it was about the pitfalls Trump needed to avoid. And I went around and talked to various strategists. And he seemed to have dodged all the pitfalls. He didn't spend a lot of time talking about 2020, which I know it's been hammered home. I don't know who's in his ear about it, saying, stop talking about how you really won the election. And he dodged that pretty artfully on the debate stage, despite the persistence of the moderators. And he dodged the whole issue of the rioters and whether he caused that. And he pivoted okay on that. He didn't get too nasty with Biden. I thought in many ways Biden was nastier with Trump, bringing up his relationship with the porn star Stormy Daniels, his convictions, his looming criminal trials, the things he said in the past allegedly about war veterans. And he called him, he called Trump a loser and a sucker on the stage. Biden, if anything, then Biden called him whiny. And Trump, for the most part, benefited from this debate rule that did not allow interruptions. And he pretty much, adhered to that rule, and he let he let Biden lay some serious insults on him. And he only shot back occasionally, and he was really effective when he did it. So, for example, when Biden made that strange remark about how we finally beat Medicare, and then Trump spun it around and he started talking about Medicaid, which is the bigger problem with illegal immigrants. But he said, "Yeah, you're killing it right now." And then he made the comment about how I can't understand what he just said, and I don't think even Biden knows what he said. But he didn't spend the entire debate really, just hammering Biden on his mental acuity issue. He really went after him on the issues, which is, if you look at the polls, Biden's bigger problem almost than his age and the fact that he looks like he's not fit for the job is that people are really not happy with he's got really low approval ratings. He's down into like the high 30s, really low approval ratings. It's because people are not happy with the job he's doing. And Trump stuck to that storyline pretty well. He just said, let's look at your record and let's look at my record. He kept going back to that and calling Biden a failure. And I think he was disciplined and measured, and he didn't look, we've all seen Trump when he gets unhinged and angry. And that's when people say, well, he can't do that. That turns off voters. He largely stayed away. I'm curious to see what Seth thinks. But I think he largely stayed away from that kind of performance that tends to turn off the wavering middle, the people who aren't sure who they're going to vote for.
Seth, what are your opinions on the matter?
I mean, if you recall the first debate with Hillary Clinton in 2016, Trump was wandering around the stage, behind her.
Right.
And then the first debate against Joe Biden in 2020, it was interruption. So yeah, I mean, if you just take like those two anecdotes, it doesn't tell the whole story, right? But just the performance anecdotes are the juxtaposition there is pretty stark.
Yeah.
So yeah, as far as Biden goes, I mean, Trump goes coming in, it was questions about temperament. It's still going to be questions about temperament, but he didn't do anything to reinforce those notions, I think.
And the threshold was low for Trump. Say he was going up against a more challenging opponent on the debate stage. Would he have been able to stick to that calm, measured appearance, or would that have, set him off? I'm looking ahead. I'm like, well, what if they suddenly replace him with Biden with a more, mentally agile candidate, and they put up, how will he perform? I mean, he had it pretty. Let's face it, Trump had it pretty easy on the debate stage. I think we can all admit that, because President Biden he could have just said nothing and let President Biden sink himself and have the entire. I mean, I thought what was really interesting too is, so Biden had the 7 days at hunkered down at Camp David, where they set up a TV studio and brought 24 aides and all that stuff. But he gets there and he wasn't even able to fill. Like, there were times when the moderators, Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, would say, "You have 45 more seconds, Mr. President. Do you want?" Like, he wasn't even filling the time, so he wasn't able to articulate at length the answers to these really important questions that they were asking. I thought the moderators did a good job, and I'm sure we'll get to this, getting at the heart of some of the real questions about Biden's administration, why voters are giving him these really low approval ratings. But
can I chime in?
Yeah.
Just I want to piggyback on that a little bit, because I was trying to think of this in a broad way, like what are the takeaways here? And the thing I keep thinking about is Joe Biden was in the Senate for decades, right? He was vice president, he was president, and he's on stage struggling to tell people what he's done.
Yeah.
And I find that it's, like if Susan or I were trying to tell people what we've done as reporters, we could probably have a conversation with a lot of people, right? And we don't have, decades and decades, not Joe Biden type experience. So
I'm close, but no. Yeah.
When I think about it that way, it's really interesting that after this long, that not only can he not tell people what he's done in a clear way, but on top of that, there's no way he can handle in an agile way, like Susan talking about, the incoming fire hose from Trump, who are just
or the moderators, or just the questions. Yeah,
exactly.
And I was talking to for one of my stories I reported on last week, a neurosurgeon in New York, and he didn't want to go on the record, but he was willing to talk about what he thought about Trump, and I've talked to him in the past about Biden's operations that he's had on his brain, because he's had two operations for aneurysms in his brain, or blood clots in his brain. But this doctor said, even if they gave him, say, Adderall or Plavix, it's different types of pills you can take that can rev up your performance. He said that given the way Biden has, what he called the baseline, the way his performance has been over the past few weeks or months, which is when we all think this kind of accelerated. He just said, there's all that kind of medication can do is make a person look alert and more energized, more awake. But it can't change your brain. In other words, it's not going to make Biden answer those questions any more ably than he is off the medication. Because if that kind of drug existed, think of how it could be helping people with dementia. Everybody would be taking it. But instead we see commercials for Prevagen or all these pills that are supposed to help you with your cognitive ability. He thinks Trump is at the level, Biden, excuse me, long night. The Biden was at the level where you can't really pump him up anymore cognitively, and that in his view, he saw the debate as potentially disastrous for Biden because there wouldn't be a teleprompter, because he really needs something to constantly guide him and keep him going at this point cognitively. And I think you saw that last night. So when he would start answering questions, even though I'm sure he practiced a lot of this stuff at Camp David, he would trail off, lose his train of thought, occasionally in a disastrous way, or just run out of things to say because he couldn't remember it. And that's because he didn't have, he couldn't go back and forth with his teleprompter to remind him what he's supposed to be talking about. And that is a classic sign of just, memory problems and cognitive problems that come with aging. And the guy is 81 years old.
Yeah.
I mean, the oldest president in history, and Trump would be the oldest president, second oldest president in history if he wins as well. But I think, as one of a former Obama advisor was saying, I think it was David Plouffe or somebody was saying, they may be 3 years apart, but on the stage they looked 30 years apart.
Yeah. No, I mean, part of the debate rules is that they weren't allowed note cards. They weren't allowed, to talk to their advisors during commercial breaks or during breaks. It was really them on the stage. And this is rounding up kind of the last question I have. And Seth, you can go first on this. There was a lot of talk going into this that it's CNN, it's moderators Jake Tapper, Dana Bash. They've been Trump haters in the past. Would they be good moderators for this debate? And would the debate format, as agreed upon, benefit or hurt Trump? And the fact that there was no, audience in the room, that the mics could be cut off, that, it really seemed to go against Trump. It was going to be a 3-on-1 debate. Overall, how do you think the moderators were? How do you think CNN handled themselves? And do you think this format benefited or hurt Trump?
I think I'd go with what Susan was saying earlier, that a lot of the rules that people initially thought might work in Biden's favor actually worked in Trump's favor. Again, I think Susan had it spot on with the idea that cutting off the mic actually might have protected Trump from himself in a lot of ways, and also just allowed the spotlight to be purely and solely on Biden when it was his time to deliver. And as far as the moderators go, it wasn't super combative. I feel like they answered a lot of straightforward questions. The conviction stuff with Trump did not come up until late in the debate. So I don't know. There was nothing that really stuck out in a major way to me that would swing me one way or the other. So I guess maybe in my mind, that's the sign of a job well done. Can I throw one more quick thing in here that's
Absolutely
unrelated to the, just with this race in a lot of ways was always about Biden figuring out a way to cobble together a coalition, even though people aren't enthusiastic about him. And a major ingredient into that all along has just been people that don't like Donald Trump, right? They call it the Trump derangement syndrome. It's a real sentiment, but this is going to be tested right now. Like what we saw last night is really going to test the depths of how much people are willing to basically vote for anything other than Trump. And so I don't know how that's going to play out. I don't know how powerful that sentiment is, but it is a sentiment that helped elect Joe Biden in the first place. And the question is whether or not that is going to erode to levels that would never allow him to recreate that.
Susan, any last, thoughts on the debate and also how CNN, handled the first debate of this season?
This is the first debate, and it could be the last debate. I know that Biden said last night, after an appearance following the debate that he was interested in debating President Trump again, and that he wasn't dropping out. He said that also later. Trump's campaign team says we'll do 5 debates, however many he wants, anywhere, anytime, any place. They're still saying that. Well, obviously they just won, so that they're fully confident they could do this again. I thought the moderators were also protected by the mic cutoff, because sometimes moderator bias comes in when you see conflict on the debate stage. I moderated the 2012 Republican debate in Iowa, one of those debates. And I know that from my perspective, from doing that, there's a lot of ways moderators can control what's happening in favor or disfavor a candidate without even realizing it. And I think when people are interrupting, and who you cut off when they interrupt can really change the whole pace of the debate. It can shift who's winning and losing. So I think the mic cutoff really was the winner. The winner of the debate was the mic cutoff, because it paced those moderators. And it was interesting. They were almost robotic in the way they were asking the questions. And I thought there were a few times when it seemed as though people were saying online on social media that Jake Tapper was trying to save Biden by cutting him off when he was stumbling and then going back to Trump. And, I don't know. I think they let him, hurt himself pretty well on the debate stage. And they asked Trump some really tough questions. They went for, the jugular on are you going to be a threat to democracy and the January 6th stuff. And so there was all that. And it did seem, if I were to say the questions were slightly easier for Biden, yes, they were, but you couldn't really tell because Biden was just so bad. So if Biden was performing well, we'd be saying, well, they still seem, but okay. So, but my winner of the night, it's Trump, but it's also the mic cutoff. And I think, two big takeaways out of there were the exodus of the Commission on Debates. They are the ones who typically organize this. They pick the cities, the moderators, the simulcasting. They do it all. Gone. Suddenly that's thrown out the window, and it's a free-for-all between the campaigns. President Trump agreed to these terms because he said, I'll do this anytime, anywhere, any place. And then Biden said, okay, make my day on social media. And that's how we got here. And so I wonder if that's, going forward, we've changed the way debates happen. It's a big free-for-all now. So that's a really big deal. And so in my view, for the big takeaway was just the whole format and how it's kind of changed. The past few years when we've had these debates, it's been interruptions and fighting and just kind of, this death match on stage in front of a live audience. Getting rid of the audience just made it, and cutting off the mics made it the kind of conversation that I always hear people say they want after one of these really argumentative debates. Like, why can't we just do it this way? Well, there you have it. We had it that way. And I feel like that was a big winner. And people are going to want this format in the future.
All right. So I don't know if we need to do winner or loser of last night's debate. I think it's pretty obvious. But Seth, out of Joe Biden, Donald Trump, who was the winner? Who was the loser?
I mean, I'm going more on the loser side than anything. Biden's got some work to do.
And I told you the debate format was the big winner. And the other losers really are the primary voters, because they all voted for Biden as the only choice. Don't forget, Democrats squeezed that thing so there could not be a real contest. And you had this guy, Dean Phillips, who's a congressman, who ran, vigorously in New Hampshire. I followed him around the state, and he really, and I've talked to him since then. He's like, look, this was my point. We needed a strong candidate. We need a candidate that can stand up against Trump on the debate stage, and now here we are. So I feel like the real losers were the Democratic voters and other voters who voted for Biden in the primary, and they're now facing the possibility that maybe he won't even be on the ticket. What will the ticket be? Here we are, just a few months out from the election, and there are real questions about who's going to be on the Democratic ticket after the primary is over. And the party knew that he was really in this shape, and they kept going forward with it. And Jill Biden, she's being blamed for some reason, rightly or wrongly. They said, we're going to keep going with this. We're not going to drop out. So, for me, the losers are the voters, and that's really unfortunate.
We may want to
Well,
toss RFK Jr. in there too.
yeah, I know. They
Oh
they
no,
pushed him out. They pushed him out of the party. Now
yeah,
he's
but
running as
he's not going to
independent.
win. He's only getting 10%. He could, but he's spoiler. He is spoiler. You know, in any number of these battleground states, he's getting like almost 8% on average in these polls. So he's a whole nother story that we can do a video about.
Well,
He's gonna be a factor. Whether he was on that debate stage or not, he's going to be a factor in this election.
well, Seth and Susan, thank you so much. And we will be following your bylines because there's a lot more to come between now and the Republican convention and now and the Democratic convention. So thank you so much for your analysis. Thank you so much for your reporting. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.